When choosing an inverter, one of the first things, and something they never tell you, one of the first things to look at is the stud size of the positive and negative terminals. Now this is my 8-year-old Cen-Tech, Harbor Freight Cen-Tech, model 69662. This is my 2000 4000 watt modified sine wave inverter that runs my well pump. It's worked great for me for 8 years. It continues to work great. I just took it out to make this video. Now, what size are these studs? And why is that important? Because you want to get an inverter cable that fits those studs perfectly. Now this cable that I have in my hand is a 3/8 ring terminal. And we can see how sloppy it is on that stud. So what size are these? Well, if you don't know, you can measure it with a nut and bolt gauge. Now this is a plastic one. They also sell metal ones. I don't advise using a metal one for this task, because when you're measuring on the battery, if the metal comes across these two posts, you'll create a short circuit. This will actually weld to the posts. It gets red hot. Very terrible situation. Been there, done that. You don't want to make that mistake. Okay, so we have a little plastic one. We can use a ruler as well. And I have the 3 stud sizes you're likely to encounter right here. This is a 1/4 inch. That's exactly what that is right there. It fits perfectly in that 1/4 inch hole. Here's a 5/16 hole. You can see at the top how much slop there is. Let's find 3/8 right here. This is the size of the ring terminals on the inverter cables that Harbor Freight sells. Look at the slop on that. So you can take your stud out and you can measure it with one of these. Now another way to measure that stud is to use the ruler. Measure the outside of the threads, not the inside. And you can clearly see that this is a 1/4 inch stud. Alright, let's try this one. Well, that's past the 1/4 inch mark, not quite to the 3/8 mark. So this would be a 5/16 stud. Okay, let's try this one. That's a 3/8 stud. You can see. And if you're setting something up brand new for the first time, you definitely want to know what size these studs are, what size these studs are, knowing that they might be different, and then you can order your cables. Now this one I have in my hand is 3/8 both ends. So is that one. This one is 5/16 both ends. This one, 3/8 on that end, 5/16 on this end. So if you had a battery that was 3/8 here, this is what you'd need. And if you had an inverter that was 5/16 here, then this particular cable would be a perfect fit. These are the things they never tell you. The size of that stud is almost never in the specifications. You end up with lousy connections, things that don't work. So number 1 on my list, you want to know, be aware of what your stud size is. All right. Number 2 would be stud orientation. These studs are vertical. They come straight up. And here's the new Jupiter Harbor Freight 2000 4000 watt modified sine wave inverter. Kind of replaces this one. It's the same price. I paid $130 for this 8 years ago. This one's $130 in 2022 when it's on sale anyways. So you want to know whether the studs are mounted vertically or horizontally. Both of these inverters have vertically mounted studs. Now, why is that important? Because say I've mounted the inverter on a paint bucket, a Sherwin-Williams paint bucket, because ideally you want your inverter at the same height as the top of the battery. So this battery, about 8 inches tall, so if possible you want to get the inverter about the same height. And that's important because now we can take our cable and put one end here, this is a 6-inch long, or maybe that's a 9-inch. I would say this is a 9-inch, let's measure it. Yep, this one's a 9-inch. This is a 9-inch long, and we have 5/16 on either end. This end's a little sloppy, this end's a perfect fit. And that's how you want to mount it. Easy. Now what if the stud was going this way? What if the stud was coming in horizontally? Well, we'd have to put a wicked bend in this, and it's not easy. Because once this is tightened down here, there's no flexibility. You would have to really twist this. It'd be fighting you every step of the way. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying it's difficult. So I would prefer, if I have a battery with vertical posts, I want an inverter with vertical posts. If my battery is using horizontal posts, then I want an inverter with horizontal posts. So whatever you get first, that kind of says what you want on your inverter end. So stud orientation is the next thing to be aware of. The third thing on my list is self-consume, what I have called parasitic drain in previous videos. And that's where my old Cen-Tech, as reliable as it is, has me concerned. Self-consume has to do with how much power the inverter draws when it's been turned on, but there's nothing connected to it or it's not doing any work. So let's make a test and measure that. And I'm going to use this inexpensive Harbor Freight meter. Works fine for this test. Figuring that most people have something, either have this or something like this, because the list price on this is probably $5 or so, most often on sale for $1.99, sometimes free with any purchase, 25% off the $4 or $5, so very, very inexpensive. We're going to use this one. It works okay. Now remember, for this test, do you remember how to do it? We're going to measure amps. We're going to put the function and range switch right here on 10 amps. We're going to move the red cable from this middle socket to this top socket, and you can see the lines right here pointing to this top socket. We're going to connect the red lead to the positive post of the battery. And that positive post would normally have been connected to this positive post, so we'll connect the black lead from the meter to this post. And that way the meter just captures the flow. Now on the negative side, we're just going to use a clip lead. Never have enough clip leads for doing any kind of testing like this. Okay, now we'll turn the meter on. And we're reading here about 10 milliamps. That's what it's taking to run this meter. So 0.01 amps, that's 10 milliamps. 0.1 would be 100 milliamps. All right, now I'm going to turn the inverter on. It's not on right now. Green light comes on. This is the idle. It's just sitting here, not doing any work. How much battery power is it consuming? So this would be, my pump is not pumping. Our water tank is full, the hot water tank is full, the toilet tank is full, the tub is full, everything is full, our water junks are full, pump is shut off. It's just sitting here now. What if we left it on? Well, at this moment, it's drawing 1.5 amps. And if this has been doing some work, the last time I measured this, we're drawing 3.5 amps. So the idle current, at this moment, 1.5 amps. How long would it take for this to drain our battery? All right, let's do the math. I have our calculator. We have a 100 amp battery divided by 1.56 amps, 64 hours, divided by 24 hours in a day. If we just left it here and never turned it off, our battery would be dead in about 2.5 days. Another way of looking at this, if we have our hazard-free solar system connected, those solar panels better be putting out at least 1.5 amps to make up for this drain. So if we just left it on and wanted to ignore it, we better be putting 1.5 amps back into this battery. Otherwise, we're draining this battery at a rate of almost 1.6 amps. And I've seen much higher. Because if this is working, that's what I get. We need to know what that self-consume is. Now, in the manual that came with this inverter, self-consume is not given. But we've measured it. Okay, let's try some newer inverters and see how they do. Turn off my meter, break the circuit. That's just lost power to the inverter. Here's the Jupiter that they're selling right now. They look the same. This is slightly larger, slightly taller. It's the new model, very different inside from the old model. Let's hook it up and see what the drain on this one is. All right, we'll turn our meter on. Turn our inverter on. Nice bright light on this one. And we're also reading 1.67 amps. And that's consistent with what I have seen before. So again, that would give us about 2.5 days. If we did nothing, we're drawing no power from this. This would completely deplete our 100 amp hour battery in about 2.5 days. Also, we better have a solar system capable of putting that back into the battery non-stop if we're going to leave this on. So that could be much improved. Now I want to state that both of these inverters start and run my pump perfectly. If anything, this new one runs the pump even better. The pump sounds a little quieter when it's running off of this inverter. They both work absolutely fine, and no issues with either one. All right, the next thing I want to, well, let's look at yet another inverter. Turn off my meter. Turn off the, okay. So those are the $130 jobbies. Well, here's the new Harbor Freight pure sine wave model. It's a lot bigger. We'll stay on point and measure this drain. Okay, remember that 10 milliamps is just what it takes to run this meter. So we'll turn the inverter on. Okay, we're on now. See, 10 volt. Shows we got about 12 volts here because this would be 13, 14. So showing that our DC input is somewhere around 12.5 volts here on this little meter. And here's our self-consume. That's a little over 600 milliamps, so 0.6 of an amp. And that's quite low, because in the manual that comes with this, if I'm not mistaken, it says less than 800 mils. Less than or equal to 800 mils. We're only measuring about 610 mils. That's very low parasitic drain. Okay, let's do the math. Let's say that we have, turn this on. Let's say that we have a 100 amp hour battery and we're draining it at 0.6 of an amp. So we're going to divide that by 0.6. Gives us 166 hours. Well, 24 hours in a day. We'll divide that by 24. We can run this thing almost 7 days. Just leave it on, and it's not going to kill that battery. It'll take a week, I should say, before it's going to kill that battery, if it's just set here idling. That also means, if we're trying to make up for this draw with a solar panel, well, our panels are putting out between 5 and 6 amps. So one panel, as long as the sun is shining, or even if it's just a partly cloudy day, one panel's got no problem keeping up with that little current drain. Yeah, big improvement. So we got 3 improvements right off the bat with this. We have bigger studs. We have very low current drain. I don't know that this is an improvement. It's certainly a difference. So, okay. Quite impressive. Very, very impressed with how little current this draws at idle. Let's turn it off. Okay, we'll check some of these others. Now I want to make something clear. We have very thin wires here. The meter is rated at 10 amps DC, so we really don't want to run anything off of here while we're making this test. But up to 10 amps, we can run it through these little cables. I really don't want to get anywhere near 10 amps. Just want to make that clear. This is just a test. Now, number 4 is going to be USB operation. That's number 4 on my list. And we're going to find something very, very interesting. Because, I'm going to turn this off. Parasitic drain just dropped. There would be zeros here, except we couldn't measure it because the meter itself is drawing that. This is being drawn by the meter, not by this. Here's our little USB tester. Question: do we need to turn this on in order to run a USB device, like charge our phone? Now, for a lot of people, charging their phones is the most important thing that they need to do in a power failure. Well, this is not an obvious thing, and they don't tell you this, but watch. The inverter is not on. The USB is live. We're not drawing any amps right now. 5 volts, 499. What did we do to our parasitic drain? We increased it by maybe 10 mils? Maybe nothing? There is no need to turn this inverter on to charge a phone. This turns on as soon as you plug a device into it. Pretty nice, not obvious. A very good feature. Okay, let's see how the old one works. Okay, here's my 8-year-old Cen-Tech. Power is off. USB device. It works. Look. Maybe increased the parasitic drain by 10 milliamps. No need to turn on the inverter and run this up to 3 or 4 amps just to charge a phone. Now, I'm mentioning this because I read some reviews of people who buy these expensive inverters and then turn them on to charge phones, and they're complaining that the phone is not. They've got an AC adapter plugged in here and a USB charger. All you have to do is plug in right there. You don't need the USB charger. You don't need to turn the inverter on. Just plug in right there. On these 2 models anyways. Now let's see if that's true for all models. All right. Okay, we're back to the new Jupiter Pure $300 model. It's pure sine wave. Still drawing that 10 milliamps. Inverter is off. Plug in the USB, see if it'll go. Goes this way on this one. No joy. Still drawing our 10 mils. Alright, I'll turn on the inverter. Oh, now it comes on. So on this model, even though it has low self-consume, we do have to turn on the inverter to run the USB. And look, if that's the most important thing to you is to charge your phone, we have higher self-consume now. Now we're up to 600 mils, 620 mils. So this uses a lot more power to charge a USB device than either of these 2 older ones. And the reason is, these do not have to be turned on to charge USB devices. This new one does. So in that regard, these work better. Very interesting, don't you think? Okay, next on my list is physical size. Do you know that in the latest Harbor Freight online ad, they don't tell you how big this inverter is? Well, it's a lot bigger than those older ones, so let's measure it. Oh, I need something bigger than that. So end to end, I'm getting a little over 13 inches, maybe 13 and a quarter or so. 13 and a half maybe. And side to side, it's about 9 inches. So 13 and a half by 9 on this new one. I don't know why they don't give you the dimensions, but these older ones are about 9 and a quarter long. A little bit, maybe a quarter of an inch less, maybe 9 inches wide. So roughly 9 and a quarter, 9 inches square. They're a lot smaller than this new one. So there you go, 9 by 9. Forget what this one was, 13 by 9. 13 and a half by 9 on this big one. All right, the next thing. Number of outlets. These inverters can have anywhere from 1 to 4 outlets, maybe some of the really expensive ones 6. Note this has got 2 GFI outlets. These older models, less expensive models, have 3 outlets. I like the fact that these outlets are correctly orientated. These outlets go side to side. Makes it a little bit harder to use a right angle plug. They do work. I can't fit 2 right angle plugs in here. It blocks. There's a little light down here and the light on top that kind of get blocked. I prefer this style. I think most people would, in use, prefer outlets that are just like the outlets on your wall. So number of outlets, how they're orientated, is also important. Now while we're on that subject, let's take a look at some of these little tiny inverters. See, that's a 2 outlet unit. This is a 750 watt. Two outlets orientated correctly. This is a great inverter. Runs my electric chainsaw, used it many times for lots of purposes. And why would you want something like this when you've got big inverters like these? Or what about this one? Here's a little 2 outlet 400 watt inverter. Why would you want this when you've got big inverters? Well, the answer is it's important to match the inverter to the job. So let's see how that works. Now, for whatever reason, you might think that you can only have one inverter connected to your battery at a time. But that's not the case. You can have 2 inverters connected to the battery at the same time. And why would you want to do that? Because this is my old Cen-Tech. It has an idle current, typical idle current after the pump's been run of 3.5 to 3.6 amps. This one has an idle current of less than half an amp. So if I have a small load that I want to run, like a TV, why would I want to be drawing that much overhead from my battery when I can just as well run it on this one that draws practically nothing? So yeah, you can have as much as you want connected to this battery. Okay, inverter's on. You want to charge your phone? see how this one's going to work. Works upside down, so we'll tilt it. Oh, the meter's on. Turn the inverter off. Doesn't work. USB is off. Manual's not going to tell you that either. So if all you had was a big inverter that drew a tremendous amount of power, and all you want to do is charge your phone, maybe something like this, or like this little one, would be nice to have as well. These are both terrific inverters. I think I paid maybe $15 for this one on sale some time ago, years ago. And maybe $20 for this one on sale years ago. They've both been great. Used them again and again for different things. Very, very happy with them. Idle current on this one, I measured 0.5 amp. Look at the idle current on this. What did I measure using that same little meter? Come on. Little over 1/10 of an amp, 0.12 amps. So, very important if you want your battery to last a long time, to match the inverter to the job. Obviously, these two little inverters are not going to start my pump. But they will run my TVs. They'll run lots of things. And they'll consume less energy from my battery system than these big inverters. So the lesson to be learned is, for very little money, you can get a lot more battery life out of your system by properly sizing the inverter to the job. I really don't need these big inverters to run small appliances. That's another mistake that people make. And the last thing on my list, remote control. I bought this inverter and also one other we're going to be looking at very shortly, mostly because, not only because of the pure sine wave, supposed to run your stuff cooler, quieter, last longer, and so on. Use less energy from the battery, but also because it's got a remote. Our battery backup system is in the basement. Obviously, we're living on the first floor. It's a pain to keep running up and down the stairs to turn these inverters off when you're not using them. So the remote was a big selling feature on these new inverters. So should we rush out and spend the money for one of these new inverters? Is it a better buy than this Jupiter or this old Cen-Tech? Very low self-consume, remote control, big battery studs, looking good right now. Well, let's go see if it can actually do anything. Okay, we're ready to run our first test with this new pure sine wave inverter. I've got my little meter set. This time we're measuring volts. We've got it on DC volts 20. Note that I have moved the banana plug to the middle socket. We're reading 12.5 volts on this West Marine battery. And we're going to try running a belt drive fan and blower motor. So, okay, what do we have for volts? 115 volts. Amps, 3.6 amps. And the full service amps is 3.9 amps. So we're going to use that higher figure. So let's see what kind of watts this is going to draw. I'll turn it on. 115 volts. Remember that watts equals volts times amps times 3.9 equals, well, we'll get about 450 watts. I'll just round it off. 450 watt motor. So we'll plug this in. There's no on-off switch here, so this should go. Absolutely no problem running this, and I have this little thing here so you can see it rotate. Sounds good. Started right up. No problem running this blower motor. Okay. Why did I decide to run this test? Because a furnace blower is one thing and a well pump is another. So here we are connected. The interstate 100 amp hour batteries at 13.3 volts. It's connected to the solar charger, which does a great job. Doesn't get much better than 13.3 volts. I've got a kilowatt plugged in. The well pump just called for water. Let's give it a shot. Okay, I'm thinking now that maybe the kilowatt is pressing one of the buttons on the ground fault interrupter outlets. So let's get that out of there. Okay, where's the battery? Battery is, disconnected the positive lead. Get that reconnected. We're still at 13.4 volts. Try again. Error. Quite a disappointment. $300 inverter doesn't work as well as the less expensive modified sine wave models. Live and learn. Thanks for watching.